Hello and welcome to this video on using oak in your beer. How many times have you seen a quintessential tavern scene with beer pulled directly from a barrel on the wall? These scenes are not so far from the truth. Historically, beer was stored and transported in oak barrels, much like wine and whiskey is today. The change in storage practices has directly affected and changed the taste of classical beer. Much like we store beer in glass bottles to deter taste and aroma from leaching into and out of the beer, we do not see the changes in taste from the wood of barrels. Despite a broad shift away from the practice by industrial producers, micro, craft, and home brewers are beginning to use oak and other wood products again. As a rule, oak is almost universally associated with English, Scottish, and similarly located ales. These are mostly stout, porter, brown, and IPAs. There are also some bitter beers that are included in this. As a broad rule of thumb, you'll find that oaking of beer is done with dark, strongly flavoured beer. This is somewhat to avoid the overpowering taste. Sometimes you'll see it used with Central European beers as well, but these are again your very dark, very strongly flavoured beers. We have previously spoken about how you can flavour and age your homebrew with oak. When we spoke about it before, we specifically spoke about using oak chips, and we will be using those again in this video. There are many other varieties ranging from whole barrels to essences and extracts, each having their own strengths and weaknesses ranging from cost and convenience through to just what you are going to get in the product. The oak chips are very popular amongst home brewers. This owes to how convenient they are, but how effective they are also. When you consider these two benefits and their comparatively low cost, you get a lot of bang for your buck. You'll find them sold in small quantities, and they look sort of like wood shavings. The advantages to using oak chips are simple. They have a large surface area relative to their volume. That means you get more interaction between whatever you're trying to flavour and the oak. That means better movement of flavour in and out of the oak chip. The advantage in that is that if you're trying to flavour beer quickly, you can get a strong flavour. The disadvantage is that you obviously have less control over just how quickly that flavour is imparted. Depending on how you're doing this, it may also be difficult to remove the oak chips from your beer product. There are ways around this, of course, and depending upon what you want to do, and when you use your oak chips, these can be more or less of a concern. The product or consequences of using oak chips in your beer will be the imparting of certain aromas and flavours. Like with wine, you'll find that there are specific, common scents and tastes associated with it. Generally, we're talking about vanilla and caramel. There's some other variations on this, and they'll vary depending on what wood chips you are using and on what basis they've been derived. There are three common types of oak chip used: American, Hungarian, and French. American oak is a strong, bold flavour. French oak is much more subtle and generally stronger in flavours like vanilla. Hungarian is the in-between of the two and less frequently used as a consequence. Oaking beer tends to have either a desire for strong flavour or subtle flavour, with less commonly used intermediaries. In order to use your oak chips in the beer, it is relatively straightforward. You can either add them directly to the fermentation, add them to a secondary fermenter, or use them in small batch modifications after you've completed your fermentation. This is done by adding a concentration, generally grams per litre, of your oak chips to your fermentation, or in some cases, the secondary fermentation. As we've mentioned, the high surface area relative to volume gives you a quick and more efficient way of getting that flavour across, and so depending on when you're going to be doing it, you need to adjust the amount you're adding. Add to this they are going to sink to the bottom. So if you're doing them in a large fermenter, you need to be careful on how you're going to dispose of them after the fact. There are various recommendations, and for the fermentation and secondary fermenter approach, these range between 10 and 50 grams per 1 and 5 liters. If you're looking at trying to age after the fact, after your fermentation is completed, this can be done a little more easily. You can add either the oak chips directly to a large glass vessel, add your beer to this, leave it to sit for a week, preferably in a slightly warm environment, which will help to speed up that aging process and imparting those flavors. Or alternatively, you can keep it simply stored for an extended period in a cold, stable environment. Either of these approaches will impart the oakiness to your beer. The next question though is, what about if you want to keep reusing these oak chips and you don't want to have them as a one and done product? This is surprisingly easy to achieve. You can keep them stored after you retrieve them from your fermenter, beer bottle or similar. Combine them with something like bourbon whiskey in a large container, and it will reabsorb some of those flavors that the oak chips had held onto before then. These can then be re-released once more when you combine them with beer a second time, and so on. You can keep recycling them more or less perpetually. Over time, you will see some diminishing results, and this will be owing to the way the beer is structured, deterioration of it, changes in charring, and more. But you can keep some degree of productivity going for quite a while, so long as you're willing to take a little bit of effort. Thank you for watching this video. If you found the idea of oaking your beer interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.